On a freezing Los Angeles night, Keanu Reeves spots a rundown car hidden in the corner of a parking lot. Inside, a young mother clutches her crying baby beneath torn blankets, trying to survive the cold. He hesitates. Just one choice could change everything. What Keanu does next will leave the world speechless. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The parking lot was nearly empty, its silence broken only by the soft hum of streetlights and the distant rustle of wind through the palm trees. Keanu Reeves stepped out of a small organic market, 2 paper bags balanced carefully in one hand. He had just finished a long day of filming and, for the first time in weeks, felt the quiet satisfaction that came from doing something normal, buying groceries, feeling anonymous. Just another man walking through the glow of a late-night parking lot. The air carried a cool bite, unusual for Los Angeles, but refreshing. He pulled his black hoodie tighter around his shoulders, adjusting the hood out of habit. After years of fame, cameras, and noise, he had learned to cherish solitude. The world outside his roles often felt surreal, yet moments like this ordinary human kept him grounded. As he walked toward his car, a flicker of movement caught his eye in the farthest corner of the lot. An old, beaten-up sedan sat isolated under a dim light. The car looked decades old, its paint chipped, its bumper held together with tape. The windows were fogged from the inside, blurring whatever was within. Keanu paused. Something about it didn't feel right. A low sound reached him so faint, it could have been the wind. But then it came again. Unmistakable this time. A baby's cry. Thin, muffled, desperate. He turned his head slowly, scanning the area. Near the car, a young woman was pushing a row of shopping carts toward the return rack. Her movements were hurried, almost anxious. She wore an oversized sweatshirt and jeans several sizes too big. Strands of brown hair escaped a messy bun, brushing her pale cheeks as she moved. The way she glanced around, avoiding eye contact with anyone who might be nearby, told a story of fear and fatigue. Keanu's instincts stirred. The combination of the fogged windows, the car's isolation, and the woman's behavior painted a picture he couldn't ignore. She pushed one cart after another as if performing a routine she wasn't paid for, something to stay busy, to look occupied, to belong somewhere she didn't. He leaned slightly on his car, pretending to check his phone, while his eyes followed her discreetly. Each time she finished gathering carts, she walked back to that same sedan. Her pace quickened when she reached it, her posture softening just before she slipped inside. It hit him suddenly. That car wasn't parked there. It was home. The realization sent a chill through him stronger than the night air. He had seen homelessness before, passed by tents under overpasses and people wrapped in blankets on sidewalks. But this was different. There was a baby inside that car, someone small, innocent, trying to sleep through the cold. Keanu hesitated, the weight of the moment pressing on him. He didn't want to startle her. People who've lost their sense of safety often mistake kindness for intrusion, so he approached slowly, keeping his voice low and gentle. "Hey there," he said quietly. "Are you okay?" The woman froze mid-motion, her hand gripping the handle of the last cart. Her eyes darted up, wide and cautious, then quickly down again. She mumbled, "I'm fine, thank you." The tone wasn't rude, just guarded, weary. Keanu recognized that kind of exhaustion, the kind born from fighting battles no one sees. He took a careful step back. "All right," he said softly. "If you need anything, I'll be around." She didn't respond. Her shoulders tightened as she hurried toward the sedan. Keanu watched as she opened the driver's door and slipped inside, closing it quickly behind her. The interior light blinked on for a second, and that's when he saw it. A baby wrapped in mismatched blankets, its tiny face barely visible. He stood there for a long moment, frozen. The contrast between the warmth of his grocery bags and the cold reality before him made his chest ache. Then, as if on cue, the baby let out a faint cry that cut through the still night. Keanu exhaled slowly, His heart heavy, he turned toward his car, but his mind stayed fixed on that corner of the lot. When he started the engine, he glanced at his rearview mirror. The fogged windows of the old sedan glowed faintly under the flickering light. That sight would stay with him long after he drove away. The road home was nearly empty, the hum of the tires echoing inside Keanu's car as he drove through the quiet streets. City lights blurred past, but his thoughts stayed fixed on that woman and her child. Every detail replayed the worn sweatshirt, the tremor in her voice, the way she shielded the baby from the cold as if her body alone could keep him warm. He tried to convince himself there wasn't much he could do. Maybe she had family. Maybe she was waiting for someone. But deep down, he knew what he had seen. That wasn't temporary. That was survival. At a red light, he caught his own reflection in the window. Eyes weary, brow furrowed. A man haunted by a stranger's pain. He remembered his own nights of loneliness, the moments in life when all he had left was the will to keep going. Compassion, he thought, was the only thing that had ever pulled him out of the dark. When the light turned green, he didn't accelerate right away. He sat there, motionless, listening to the distant hum of the city. Somewhere out there, that woman was holding her baby, praying for morning. As he drove the rest of the way home, guilt gnawed at him. His house, quiet and warm, felt heavier than usual when he walked inside. He set the grocery bags on the counter but didn't bother unpacking them. His mind was elsewhere in that cold parking lot, beside that rusted car. He tried to read, but the words blurred. Tried to sleep, but each time he closed his eyes, he saw her face, the thin blanket, the baby's hand twitching against her chest. Finally, sometime before dawn, he sat up, running a hand through his hair. He knew what he had to do. Tomorrow, he would go back. Not because he felt sorry for her, but because he couldn't ignore what his heart had already decided. Sometimes, doing the right thing didn't come from logic. It came from the ache you couldn't silence. And as the first hint of daylight crept through his window, Keanu whispered to himself, "No one should have to live like that. Not her. Not that baby." Morning sunlight crept through the blinds, but Keanu hadn't slept. The restless thoughts from the night before still churned in his chest. He replayed the baby's soft cry, the mother's trembling hands, the fogged windows that hid her world. Every image cut deep, each one refusing to fade. He made coffee but barely touched it. The silence of his home only amplified the noise inside his head. On his kitchen counter sat the untouched groceries from last night: vegetables, bread, soup cans. He stared at them and thought about the mother who might not even have enough to feed her child. It wasn't pity that moved him. It was responsibility. He had seen suffering before, but this time, the universe hadn't let him pass by. It was as if that woman's silent struggle had been placed in his path for a reason. Outside, the city was already waking up. Cars rumbling, people rushing to jobs, life continuing as usual. But somewhere not far from here, a woman named Emily and her baby were still trying to survive another day inside a car. Keanu set his mug down, grabbed his keys, and took a deep breath. His schedule for the day didn't matter anymore. The only thing that mattered was going back. He didn't know what he would say or how she would react, but he couldn't do nothing. As he stepped outside, the morning air was crisp, filled with promise and weight all at once. He climbed into his car, his heart steady, but his thoughts racing. The night before, he had seen a story of despair. This morning, he would begin writing one of hope. The morning sun rose over Los Angeles with a faint golden glow, cutting through the cool haze of dawn. Keanu Reeves sat behind the wheel of his black SUV, parked across from the same grocery store he had visited the night before. His coffee had gone cold in the cup holder, untouched, as his eyes stayed fixed on the far corner of the parking lot. The old sedan was still there. The same dented door, the same sagging bumper, the same tired story sitting quietly beneath the noise of the waking city. A thin layer of frost clung to the windshield, glimmering faintly under the early light. Keanu watched as the woman stepped out of the driver's side. She moved slowly, as if every muscle in her body carried the memory of sleepless nights. Her shoulders were hunched beneath a faded jacket, and her jeans hung loosely, frayed at the hem. In her arms, she carried a small grocery bag filled with little more than bread, powdered milk, and a pack of instant noodles. He could see her glancing around, scanning for anyone watching, her movements cautious, guarded. She wasn't wandering. She was surviving. Keanu's hands tightened around the steering wheel. He had hoped, in some small way, that she might have found a better place to stay. But seeing that car again, that same look in her eyes, it hit him harder than he expected. He reached for a small bag he had prepared before leaving his house. Inside was a sealed bottle of water and a folded brand new blanket still in its packaging. He had grabbed it from a box of supplies he kept for charity drives, not realizing how meaningful such a small thing could become. He hesitated for a long moment before stepping out of his vehicle. The air was brisk, his breath faintly visible. Each step he took across the asphalt echoed in his ears. He made sure not to approach too close, keeping his movements deliberate and calm. When he reached her car, he gently placed the items on the hood. No words, no note, just two quiet symbols of care. Then he turned and walked back to his car without looking back. From his seat, he waited. The minutes dragged. Finally, the car door cracked open. The woman Emily, though he didn't yet know her name, peered out cautiously. Her tired eyes darted around the lot. She spotted the blanket and water bottle and froze. She looked toward the store, then toward the nearby street, as if searching for someone to explain the gesture. But there was no one. After several seconds of hesitation, she stepped out and approached the hood. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked up the water, holding it to the light as though it were something precious. Her lips moved softly, whispering words Keanu couldn't hear through the glass. She hesitated before grabbing the blanket, pressing it briefly to her chest. For a fleeting moment, her expression softened the faintest trace of relief crossing her weary face. Keanu leaned back in his seat, exhaling slowly. It wasn't much, but it was something. Keanu sat quietly, watching as Emily folded the blanket and placed it carefully inside the car. She handled it as though it were fragile, almost sacred. Then she leaned against the driver's door for a moment, closing her eyes and letting out a shaky breath. It wasn't joy he saw on her face, it was something deeper. Relief mixed with disbelief, the kind that comes from realizing someone noticed you when you thought no one ever would. She lifted the water bottle next, twisting the cap with trembling hands before taking a long drink. The movement seemed simple, but to her, it was everything. Keanu could almost feel the exhaustion leaving her body, even if only for a moment. He looked away, not wanting her to catch him staring. He didn't want her to feel watched or pitied. This had to be her moment of safety, her moment of dignity. Still, his heart wouldn't settle. He knew enough about the world to understand that a blanket and some water couldn't fix what he had seen. A few cars began to trickle into the lot as the city woke up. Delivery trucks rumbled by, and employees in uniforms hurried into the store, carrying steaming cups of coffee. Yet the world seemed to move around Emily, as though she didn't exist. She sat in that same corner, invisible to everyone except the man quietly sitting behind his windshield. Keanu took a sip of his own cold coffee, his eyes never leaving the car. The irony wasn't lost on him. A man with more than he could ever need, watching a woman who had almost nothing. The distance between them wasn't measured in feet, it was measured in circumstance. He thought about how easy it would be to drive away, to tell himself that he had done something good, that he had tried. But that thought rang hollow. The image of the baby's small hand from the night before still burned in his memory. He could almost hear the soft cry again, that fragile sound that had pierced through the night and into his conscience. As Emily climbed back into the car, tucking the blanket around the baby, Keanu made a quiet promise to himself. This wouldn't be the end. He didn't know what form his help would take, or how he would approach her again, but he knew one thing: he wasn't going to walk away. He stayed there a few more minutes, letting the moments settle before turning the key in the ignition. The engine hummed softly, but before leaving, he cast one last glance toward the old sedan. Inside, Through the frosted glass, he saw Emily leaning forward, pressing her forehead gently against the baby's head. It was a silent gesture, but it spoke volumes: gratitude, exhaustion, and love, all tangled together. As Keanu pulled out of the parking lot, the early morning sunlight bathed the street in gold, but inside his chest, a storm was beginning to form. Traffic was light as Keanu drove through the quiet streets, but his thoughts refused to slow down. The image of that car stayed vivid in his mind. The chipped paint, the frost on the glass, and the tiny bundle of life inside. He knew how fragile it all was. A single night of freezing temperatures, a single bad break, and everything could collapse for them. He parked his car near a small park overlooking the city and turned off the engine. The silence inside felt heavy, almost suffocating. His fingers tapped restlessly on the steering wheel. Most people would have looked away and moved on. Maybe they would have justified it by saying, "Someone else will help." But he had seen too much of life's cruelty to believe that help just arrived on its own. Keanu leaned back, staring at the morning sky, the faint blue fading into white. He thought about the small acts of kindness that had once saved him, people who had shown him compassion when they didn't have to. He had never forgotten them, and now he realized it was his turn to be that person for someone else. Back in the parking lot, Emily's world hadn't changed much. She had food for another day, warmth for one more night. But he knew those moments of comfort would fade quickly. A blanket wouldn't fix her fear. Water wouldn't erase her struggle. They were temporary solutions to a much deeper wound. Keanu started the car again and drove slowly past the grocery store on his way home. The sedan was still there, quiet and still, tucked in the farthest corner like it wanted to disappear. He glanced at it as he passed, the faint outline of Emily visible through the fogged glass. He whispered softly to himself, "You don't deserve this life. Neither of you do." That night he sat at his kitchen table long after the sun went down, sketching out ideas on a notepad. Phone numbers of shelters, names of organizations, possible contacts, anything that might help. It wasn't just guilt driving him now. It was conviction. He realized he had been given something he couldn't ignore, a responsibility. And though he didn't yet know how, Keanu promised himself that tomorrow he would do more than just watch. He would act. By the third morning, the sun had yet to climb high, and the air still carried the chill of early dawn. Keanu Reeves parked in the same spot as before, staring at the far corner of the lot where the old sedan rested like a shadow of the night. He had barely slept again, his thoughts constantly circling back to the image of Emily and her baby. He didn't know why he felt so drawn to them, only that something inside him refused to let it go. The car was still there, coated in a thin layer of dust, the windows streaked from dew. He saw movement inside a faint silhouette shifting in the driver's seat. A few minutes later, the door opened, and Emily stepped out, cradling her arms against the cold. Her posture was familiar, now tense, cautious, every motion carrying both pride and exhaustion. Keanu watched as she began gathering shopping carts again, pushing them toward the corral one by one. Her body moved with slow precision, the kind of rhythm that comes from routine necessity rather than choice. He hesitated, his hand gripping the steering wheel. Part of him wanted to stay back to avoid intruding, but another part, the stronger part, knew this was the moment to bridge the silence that had stretched between them. He stepped out of his car and walked toward her, careful not to move too quickly. The morning breeze tugged at his jacket as he approached. When he was close enough for her to hear, he spoke softly, his tone calm and respectful. "Hi," he said. "I hope I'm not bothering you." Emily froze, her fingers tightening around the handle of the cart. She turned slowly, recognition flickering in her eyes. Her expression shifted from surprise to mild confusion. "You?" she said quietly, her voice faint but steady. He nodded, offering a small, gentle smile. "Yeah, I'm the one who left the blanket in the water. I hope that didn't make you uncomfortable." For a moment, she said nothing. Her gaze drifted toward the corner of the lot where her car sat, then back to him. I didn't know who it was," she murmured. "I thought maybe someone from the store left it." Keanu shook his head. No, it was me. I saw you here the other night, and I just wanted to help. I didn't want to intrude. Her posture softened slightly, though a layer of caution still lingered in her eyes. You didn't have to, she said quietly. But thank you for the blanket and the water. Her words were sincere, each syllable carrying the weight of humility and weariness. Keanu nodded once more, his tone equally soft. You don't owe me thanks. I just wanted to make sure you're okay. Emily's eyes darted toward the ground, her voice low. We're fine. The we hung in the air like a secret she couldn't hide. Keanu didn't press her. He simply nodded, letting the silence fill the space between them. She pushed another cart toward the metal rack, her steps slower this time, as though each one carried the weight of both pride and fatigue. He stood a few feet away, not wanting to crowd her. The hum of a distant delivery truck filled the air, along with the faint cry of seagulls overhead. Then, cutting through the sounds of morning, came a soft whimper, a baby's cry, muffled but clear. Emily froze. Her eyes flicked toward the car, panic flashing across her face. She hurried toward it, fumbling with the handle, and quickly slipped inside. The sound grew sharper for a moment, then softened as she cradled her baby in her arms. Keanu stayed where he was, his chest tightening. The faint sound of the baby's cries struck something deep inside him, a mix of sadness and urgency he couldn't ignore. When she emerged again, rocking the small bundle close to her chest, she avoided his gaze. Her voice trembled slightly when she spoke. He's just hungry. I'll take care of it. Her attempt to sound calm only deepened the ache in his chest. He took a slow step forward, careful not to alarm her. Can I ask? He said softly. Do you have everything you need for him? Formula, diapers, anything like that? Her eyes lifted for the briefest second, wide and uncertain. Then she shook her head. We're fine, she said quickly, though her voice faltered halfway through. He could see the truth behind her words. The tiredness around her eyes, the way her fingers gripped the baby's blanket, the tiny formula stains on the car seat beside her, it all told him the same thing. She wasn't fine. Please, he said gently. I don't mean to pry, but if you're missing something for him, I'd really like to help. Emily's lips parted, as if to answer, but she stopped herself. Her expression hardened not out of anger, but out of defense. Pride fought visibly with desperation across her face. For several seconds she said nothing, just looked down at the baby. Finally, her voice cracked in a whisper. Milk. He needs milk. Keanu didn't hesitate. Wait here, he said softly. He turned and walked briskly toward the grocery store, his pace quickening with purpose. The automatic doors parted, and within minutes, he returned carrying a small paper bag. Inside were powdered formula, diapers, and baby wipes. Emily stared at the bag as he approached, torn between gratitude and disbelief. Her arms tightened around the baby. I can't, she began, but he gently interrupted. It's okay, he said quietly. Sometimes accepting help isn't weakness, it's courage. She looked at him, eyes glistening. Then, without another word, she reached out and took the bag. Emily stood quietly, holding the paper bag close to her chest, as if afraid it might vanish. The morning breeze stirred her hair, brushing strands across her face. And for the first time since he'd seen her, Keanu noticed a faint spark in her eyes, something between disbelief and gratitude. She looked down at the baby, gently adjusting the tiny blanket around his face. Her voice was barely above a whisper when she spoke. No one's ever done something like this for us before. Keanu shook his head, his tone calm and reassuring. Then I'm glad I could be the first. You don't have to go through this alone. She hesitated, biting her lip as if the words she wanted to say were too heavy to release. When she finally met his eyes, there was an honesty in her expression that made the air between them feel still. I don't want anyone to feel sorry for me, she said softly. I can take care of him. I just need time. Keanu nodded, completely understanding. I don't feel sorry for you, he said gently. I respect you. It takes strength to keep going the way you do. That's something most people wouldn't understand until they've been there. Emily looked down again, the corner of her mouth trembling slightly. For a brief moment, Keanu saw the truth of her struggle. The exhaustion, the fear, and the fierce love of a mother doing whatever it took to protect her child. She finally whispered, "Thank you for not judging me." Keanu smiled faintly, the kind of smile that reached his eyes. "There's nothing to judge. You're doing your best. That's what matters." He stepped back slightly, giving her space. She watched him for a moment, then glanced toward the car, where her baby had begun to stir again. She shifted the bag in her arm and opened the door carefully, turning once more to look at him before getting in. "I don't know your name," she said softly. "Keanu," he replied simply. She nodded, almost shyly. "Thank you, Keanu." He gave her a small wave before heading toward his own car, the sound of the baby's soft coo echoing faintly behind him. As he opened his door, he couldn't help but glance back one last time. Emily sat in the driver's seat, feeding her baby, sunlight catching in her tired but determined eyes. For the first time in days, he felt a quiet sense of hope. The following morning arrived quiet and cool, the kind of morning that felt suspended between night and day. The parking lot was nearly empty again, and Keanu Reeves found himself driving the same familiar route, his heart heavier yet calmer than before. He didn't have a plan this time. He just needed to see that she was still okay. When he arrived, the same old sedan sat beneath the flickering light post. But this time, the car door was open. Emily sat on the curb, wrapped in the blanket he'd given her, gently rocking her baby in her arms. The baby's tiny fingers clutched the edge of her sleeve, his head nestled against her chest. For once, there was no rush in her movements, no anxious glances, only quiet exhaustion and a fragile peace. Keanu parked a short distance away and stepped out, his shoes brushing lightly against the pavement. Emily noticed him but didn't flinch or turn away this time. Her eyes followed him with curiosity rather than fear. "Hey," he said softly. "How's he doing today?" She looked down at the baby, brushing her thumb against his cheek. "He's warm," she said quietly. "That's something." Keanu smiled faintly. "That's everything." He hesitated for a moment, then gestured to the curb near her. "Mind if I sit?" Emily studied him for a few seconds, then nodded. "Sure." He lowered himself onto the curb, keeping a respectful distance between them. The air smelled faintly of asphalt and morning dew. For a while, they sat in silence. It wasn't uncomfortable, it was cautious, tentative, but human. Eventually, he spoke again, his voice soft and steady. "I realized we never properly met. What's your name?" "Emily," she replied after a pause. "Emily," he repeated. "That's a beautiful name." "And him?" She smiled faintly, her eyes softening as she looked at the baby. "Oliver." Keanu nodded slowly. "Oliver. Strong name. He looks like he's got a brave heart. Already." Emily's smile lingered for a moment longer, then faded. "He doesn't have much of a choice," she said quietly. "Life didn't give him an easy start." Keanu's chest tightened at her words. He could hear the unspoken weight behind them. The exhaustion, the endless worry, the guilt. He didn't know her story yet, but he didn't need to. The pain in her voice told enough. "You know," he said gently, "sometimes the hardest starts lead to the strongest people." Emily turned toward him, her eyes glistening but calm. "You really believe that?" "I do," he said, his tone certain. "I've lived it." Emily didn't respond right away. She looked down at Oliver, brushing a loose strand of hair from his tiny forehead. The baby's breathing had slowed, his small chest rising and falling against her arm. She seemed lost in the rhythm of it, as though each breath steadied her own. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer, touched with quiet curiosity. "What did you mean?" Keanu hesitated. He hadn't planned to talk about himself, but something in her tone, something trusting, made him open up. "I've known loss," he said, "and emptiness. The kind that makes you question everything." Her eyes lifted to his. You? He nodded slowly, looking at the horizon where the first sunlight began to stretch over the city. I've lost people I loved. I've felt broken, like there wasn't a way back. And for a long time, I didn't believe life could still offer good things. But somehow, one act of kindness led to another. People showed up when I didn't expect it. That's what helped me rebuild. Emily's expression softened. Her eyes shimmered, as though she was trying not to cry. I don't think anyone's ever told me something like that, she whispered. Keanu smiled faintly, his gaze kind but steady. Pain doesn't mean you failed. It just means you've been human long. Enough to feel deeply. You're still here. That counts for something. For a long moment, neither spoke. The sounds of the city grew around them. The buzz of traffic, the rustle of a breeze through the trees. But inside that little corner of the parking lot, the world felt still. Emily adjusted Oliver's blanket, glancing toward her car. It's strange, she said quietly. I've spent months hiding from everyone. People usually walk right past me, like I'm invisible. But you, she trailed off, shaking her head slightly. You saw us. Her voice trembled on the last word. Keanu turned toward her, his expression filled with quiet empathy. You deserve to be seen, Emily. You're doing something incredible. You're keeping him alive, even when everything around you says it's impossible. Tears finally slipped down her cheeks. She brushed them away quickly, embarrassed, but Keanu pretended not to notice. He knew how fragile dignity could feel when someone had to fight for it every day. He wanted to say more, to offer her comfort or hope, but the moment already carried its own weight. Sometimes, silence did more than words ever could. Eventually, he stood, brushing the dust from his jeans. I should let you rest, he said gently. But I'll be around, okay? Emily nodded, her voice small but sincere. Okay. Keanu gave her a small wave before heading toward his car. As he walked away, he heard Oliver stir again, a tiny coo breaking through the quiet. It was a simple sound, but it made him smile. He knew that today, something had shifted not just for her, but for him too. That evening, the city lights shimmered against the darkening sky. Keanu sat alone in his living room, the soft hum of the refrigerator, the only sound breaking the silence. His mind kept drifting back to Emily sitting on that curb, holding her baby close. There had been something in her eyes when she looked at him. A fragile strength, the kind that could weather anything but still longed for a moment of rest. He had seen resilience before, but this was different. This was survival, wrapped in love. He couldn't shake the feeling that simply walking away again would be wrong. He had promised to be around, and he intended to keep that promise. Quietly, he gathered a few things. From a drawer, he pulled a pack of new baby bottles he'd bought weeks earlier as part of a charity drop. From another shelf, a soft baby blanket he'd once received as a donation sample. Then he went to the grocery store and filled 2 bags: baby food, fresh fruit, diapers, wipes, and a small toy giraffe that caught his eye on the shelf. When the clerk bagged the items, Keanu smiled faintly. He didn't want to embarrass Emily by confronting her with too much at once. He just wanted her to feel that someone cared. Later that night, the parking lot was quiet again. The flickering lamp buzzed softly, casting long shadows across the asphalt. Keanu parked his car a short distance away and stepped out, carrying the bags carefully. He moved quietly, his footsteps barely echoing. The sedan sat still, dark inside except for the faint glow of a small night light clipped to the dashboard. He could see Emily's silhouette slumped against the seat, the baby sleeping on her chest. He crouched near the car and set the bags down beside the driver's door. On it were 6 simple words in his neat handwriting. No strings attached, just care. K. He slid the note between the bag handles, then stepped back and took one last look at the car. Inside, mother and child slept peacefully, unaware that someone had just made them a silent promise. As he drove away, the city stretched before him, like 1,000 stories untold. But tonight, one story Emily and Oliver's had already begun to change. The following morning, a soft drizzle fell over Los Angeles. The parking lot glistened under the weak daylight, reflecting the gray clouds above. Keanu Reeves pulled into his usual spot and cut the engine, watching as small drops of rain dotted the windshield. He had returned with no agenda, no plan, just the quiet pull that had guided him every day since he first saw Emily. Her car was still there, parked exactly where it had been for days. But something felt different this time. The window was cracked open slightly, and through the glass, he could see movement. A moment later, Emily stepped out, holding Oliver wrapped snugly in a blanket. Her hair was damp from the mist, her eyes tired but alert. When she saw Keanu, she didn't turn away. Instead, she called out softly, "You came back." Her voice carried through the drizzle, fragile yet deliberate. Keanu smiled faintly as he approached. "Of course, I said I'd be around." She shifted her weight from one foot to the other, hesitating before speaking again. "Can we talk?" "Of course," he said, his tone warm and patient. They sat beneath the edge of the overhang near the store's entrance, a spot sheltered from the rain. Emily cradled Oliver, who slept peacefully against her chest. For a few seconds, she said nothing, staring down at the small rise and fall of his breathing. Then, without warning, the words began to pour out. "I used to have a house," she started softly. "Not much, but it was ours. My husband, Liam, worked long hours at a construction company. We didn't have a lot, but we had enough." Keanu nodded slightly, listening but not interrupting. Her voice trembled, yet there was a steadiness in the way she spoke, as if she'd been waiting for someone to finally hear her story. "One night, he didn't come home," she continued. "There was an accident on the highway. I got the call from the police around midnight. They told me it was instant that he didn't suffer. But I still do." Her hand trembled as she brushed a tear away. Keanu's chest tightened, but he stayed silent, giving her space. "After he died," she went on, "everything fell apart. I didn't know how to handle the bills, the funeral, the mortgage. The life insurance didn't cover even half of what we needed. I tried to work, but with Oliver, it was impossible to find anyone to watch him. My husband's parents said they'd help, but they didn't trust me. They said I wasn't stable." She paused, her jaw tightening. "They tried to take him from me." The rain continued to fall softly, each drop echoing like a quiet rhythm against the pavement. Emily held Oliver closer, her voice trembling as she continued. "They filed for custody," she said, her eyes fixed on the ground. "They said I was unfit because I wasn't working, because I was grieving. They said Oliver needed a stable home, and I couldn't give him that. Maybe they were right. Back then, I couldn't even sleep through the night without waking up crying." Keanu's expression didn't change, but his eyes softened. "You were doing your best," he said quietly. Emily nodded, swallowing hard. "I tried. I really did, but I couldn't afford a lawyer. Their family had money, connections, and all I had was him." She looked down at Oliver, who stirred slightly in his sleep, his small hand gripping the edge of her coat. "I couldn't let them take him. So, one night, I packed everything we could fit into the car and left. I thought I'd figure things out once we got far enough away." Her breath hitched. "That was almost 3 months ago." The words seemed to hang in the air. Keanu could hear the exhaustion in her tone, the kind that came from running too long without rest. "You've been living in your car since then?" She nodded slowly. "I've been staying near different parking lots. Sometimes grocery stores, sometimes outside hospitals. I do odd jobs. When I can, cleaning, organizing carts, anything. I don't want to beg. I need time to start again." She blinked hard, fighting back tears. "I thought about going to a shelter, but I was scared. They always ask questions. And if someone reports me, if they think I can't care for him, child services will take him, and I can't." Her voice cracked completely now. "I can't lose him too." Keanu's throat tightened. He wanted to reach out, to do something to stop the pain in her voice, but he stayed still, knowing this moment wasn't about fixing it, was about listening. She continued, her words fragile but deliberate. "I tell him stories at night, even when he's too young to understand. I tell him his daddy was brave, that one day we'll have a home again. But every time I look at him, I think he deserves better than this." Her voice broke on the last sentence. She buried her face against Oliver's blanket, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. Keanu's eyes glistened as he looked at her. He wanted to tell her that she wasn't failing, that she had already done something extraordinary. When he finally spoke, his voice was low but firm. "You've already done something heroic," he said gently. "You kept him safe. That's what matters most." Emily looked up at him through her tears, her lips trembling as she tried to form words. But none came. Instead, she just nodded, clutching her baby tighter. For the first time since they'd met, a faint smile appeared on her face, small, fleeting, but real. The rain had slowed to a mist by the time Emily's story quieted into silence. Keanu sat beside her, still and thoughtful, his eyes tracing the lines of fatigue across her face. The sky was pale gray now, soft light breaking through the clouds like a promise. He could see how thin her shoulders looked under the worn fabric of her jacket, how tightly she held Oliver as if she feared the world might try to take him. Again. Emily exhaled shakily, wiping the tears from her cheeks. "I don't even recognize myself anymore," she murmured. "I used to have plans, dreams, things I wanted to do. Now, every day is just about surviving. Making sure he eats, making sure we're not noticed. Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever feel normal again." Keanu turned toward her, his voice steady and compassionate. "You will," he said, "and you're stronger than you think. You haven't given up, even when everything told you to. That says more about who you are than anything else." Her eyes met his, searching for something belief, maybe hope. "You really think so?" He nodded. "I know so. What you've done isn't small, Emily. Most people wouldn't have made it this far, but you did." She looked down at Oliver, who now slept peacefully against her chest, his tiny fingers curled into her sleeve. "Sometimes I think he's the only reason I'm still here," she said softly. "Then he's already your miracle," Keanu replied. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The parking lot was still, except for the occasional roll of a cart in the wind. Keanu watched her breathe, watched the tension slowly ease from her shoulders. The connection between them, once fragile and uncertain, felt real now. Built not on charity, but on understanding. Eventually, Emily whispered, "Thank you for listening, for not treating me like I'm broken." Keanu gave a small smile. "You're not broken, you're just rebuilding." She let out a faint laugh, quiet but genuine, and for the first time, the sound of it filled the gray morning with warmth. As Keanu stood to leave, she looked up at him and said softly, "I'm glad you came back." He paused, meeting her eyes. "I'm not going anywhere, Emily." And for the first time in months, she believed someone meant those words. The day after their conversation, the sky had cleared. The rain was gone, replaced by a pale warmth that made the pavement glimmer. Keanu Reeves parked in his usual spot again, but this time, his mind wasn't weighed down by hesitation. He had listened long enough. Now, it was time to act. Across the lot, Emily sat behind the wheel of her car. The driver's side door cracked open. Her hair was tied loosely, her face drawn, but calm. Oliver slept in her arms, the faintest smile tugging at his lips as if even in dreams he felt safe there. Keanu could see how thin Emily's blanket had become, how exhaustion clung to her every movement. He stepped out of his car, walked toward her slowly, and when she looked up, she didn't flinch this time. Her guard had softened. The past few days had changed something between them, built trust, fragile but real. "Morning," Keanu greeted softly. "Morning," she replied, her tone quiet but lighter than before. He paused for a moment, then said, "Emily, I've been thinking about what you told me yesterday. About the car, about Oliver. You've done more than anyone could ask, but you need a real place to rest, even for a night." She frowned slightly, uncertain. "I appreciate that, Keanu, but we'll be fine." We always are. He shook his head gently. You shouldn't have to just survive. You deserve a chance to breathe. Her eyes lowered. I don't want to be anyone's burden. You're not a burden, he said firmly. You're a mother, doing everything to protect her child. That's strength, not weight. For a long moment, she didn't speak. Keanu could tell she was battling that same pride, the one that had kept her alive but also kept her isolated. He took a quiet breath. I'll be back in a few minutes, he said softly. Please don't go anywhere. Without waiting for her reply, he turned and walked toward his car, his mind already working through the details. He knew exactly what he needed to do. He drove a few blocks down to a modest roadside motel, one he had passed hundreds times but never noticed until now. The sign flickered faintly, the kind of place built for travelers, not luxury. Inside, the air smelled faintly of coffee and detergent. The clerk behind the counter, an older man with kind eyes, recognized him instantly but didn't speak his name aloud. Keanu leaned forward. I need a room, he said simply, for a mother and her baby, just for a few nights. The man nodded, understanding without question. Within minutes, Keanu walked out holding an envelope with a room key inside and a quiet resolve in his heart. When Keanu returned to the parking lot, Emily was still there, standing beside her car with Oliver bundled in her arms. The sun had begun to dip toward the horizon, casting long amber streaks across the asphalt. She turned when she heard his footsteps, uncertainty flickering in her tired eyes. He stopped a few feet away, holding the small envelope in his hand. I found something for you, he said softly. Just a place where you and Oliver can rest tonight. Her gaze dropped to the envelope. What is it? It's a room key, he replied gently. There's a small motel just a few minutes away. It's quiet, safe, and clean. There's also a bit of money inside for food. Her body tensed. She shook her head, taking a step back. I can't accept that, she whispered. Keanu, you've already done enough. I don't want charity. It's not charity, he said, his tone calm but firm. It's a step forward. Everyone needs one. Her eyes glistened as she clutched Oliver tighter. I don't even know how to thank you. I've spent months trying to stay invisible, and now someone actually sees me. It doesn't feel real. Keanu smiled faintly. You don't need to thank me. You just need to rest. Take the room, Emily. For him. She looked down at Oliver, whose small fingers reached out from beneath the blanket, grasping the edge of her sleeve. The sight made something inside her break. The walls she had built to protect herself began to crumble. Her voice trembled. I can't remember the last time he slept in a real bed, she whispered. Keanu stepped closer and held out the envelope. Then let's make tonight the first time. Emily hesitated for another moment, then slowly reached out and took it. Her hand shook as she held the envelope to her chest. A single tear slipped down her cheek. Thank you, she said softly, her voice breaking. Keanu nodded, his tone gentle. Follow my car. I'll drive ahead. Make sure you get there safely. Emily looked at her car, then back at him. Okay, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. They climbed into their vehicles, the engines humming softly in the quiet evening air. As Keanu led the way down the nearly empty street, he checked his rearview mirror every few seconds. Emily's old sedan followed closely behind, headlights flickering faintly. Within 10 minutes, they reached the motel. The lot was small, lined with neatly trimmed shrubs and a glowing office sign. Keanu parked in front of one of the corner rooms and stepped out. Emily followed, cradling Oliver close to her chest. When she looked up at the door number, a lump formed in her throat. The room key felt heavy in her palm, not because of the metal, but because of what it meant. Emily stood silently before the motel door, her hand trembling as she fit the key into the lock. The door clicked open with a soft sound, and the scent of freshly cleaned sheets drifted out. For a long moment, she didn't move. She simply stared at the small, tidy room, the single bed with crisp white covers, a bedside lamp casting a warm golden glow, and a small bathroom door slightly ajar. It wasn't much, but to her, it felt like a palace. Keanu stood a few steps behind, watching quietly as she stepped inside. Oliver stirred in her arms, blinking at the new surroundings. His tiny hand reached for the air, as if sensing the warmth that surrounded them. Emily's voice cracked as she whispered, "It's clean. It's so clean." She crossed the room slowly, lowering Oliver onto the bed. The baby turned onto his side, letting out a tiny sigh, his face relaxing into peaceful sleep. For the first time in weeks, Emily's body loosened. Her shoulders dropped, the tightness in her chest easing. Tears welled in her eyes, spilling before she could stop them. Keanu remained by the doorway, his tone gentle. "Take your time. You're safe here." Emily turned toward him, brushing her tears with the back of her hand. "I don't even know what to say," she murmured. "No one's ever done something like this for us." "You don't have to say anything," he said. "Just rest. That's all I want you to do tonight." She nodded, her voice breaking. "Thank you." Keanu stepped back toward the hallway. Before leaving, he turned once more. Through the soft lamplight, he saw her sitting on the edge of the bed, holding Oliver's hand gently between her fingers. The scene was quiet, almost sacred, a small moment of peace after so much pain. As he walked to his car, he looked up at her window. The light glowed warmly through the curtains, a gentle beacon in the dark. For the first time since he had found her, she wasn't cold, and she wasn't alone. He leaned against his car, exhaling slowly. "It's just the beginning," he whispered to himself. Then he drove off into the night, knowing deep down that what he had done wasn't just an act of kindness. It was a promise to help her rebuild her life, one small step at a time. The drive home that night was quiet. Keanu Reeves kept one hand on the wheel, the other resting loosely on his knee as the city lights flickered past. But his thoughts were miles away, back at the motel, back to Emily and her sleeping son. The image of that warm light glowing through the curtain stayed burned into his mind. It should have brought him peace, yet something inside him felt restless. A blanket and a roof for the night weren't enough. He knew that. Comfort wasn't the same as stability. Emily didn't just need kindness, she needed a future. When he reached his house, Keanu didn't even take off his jacket. He poured himself a glass of water, sat down at his kitchen table, and pulled out his phone. His contacts list was long names of people he had met through years of charity events, community work, and quiet giving. People he trusted, people who made things happen. He began making calls. The first was to a local community center he had supported for years, a small but dedicated organization known for helping single parents and struggling families get back on their feet. The director, a middle-aged woman named Linda, answered with her usual warmth. "Keanu, it's been a while," she said. "What's going on?" He hesitated for a moment, then said, "I need help for someone, a young mother with a baby. She's been living in her car for months. She just needs a chance somewhere safe to stay, and maybe a path to work." Linda didn't hesitate. "You know, we'll do everything we can. How soon can she come in?" "Tomorrow," Keanu said. "She's in a motel tonight, but that's temporary." Linda paused thoughtfully. "We have an opening in one of our family housing units. It's small, but clean. We can also set her up with one of our social workers to help her with resources and maybe find part-time work. But our funding's been tight lately." Keanu glanced toward the window, where the city stretched out below like a sea of lights. "Don't worry about funding," he said quietly. "Just make sure she gets what she needs." Linda's voice softened. "You've always had a good heart, Keanu. Send her tomorrow morning, and we'll be ready." He thanked her, hung up, and sat back in his chair. For the first time in days, he felt a sense of direction, a plan forming, steady and clear. He looked down at his phone again, whispering to himself, "She doesn't need pity. She needs a system that works." It was time to build that system. The next morning, Keanu woke early. The light creeping through his curtains painted the room in faint gold, but his mind was already racing ahead. He sat at his desk, a notebook open in front of him, pages filled with names, addresses, and short notes scribbled in dark ink. Each name represented a connection, a resource, a possible way to give Emily and Oliver more than a one-night reprieve. He had learned long ago that generosity alone couldn't fix lives. It took structure, patience, and a plan. After a quick breakfast, he grabbed his car keys and drove across town to a small community center on Magnolia Avenue. It wasn't a fancy building, just a converted church basement with a faded sign that read Hope Haven Family Services. But he'd supported them quietly for years, funding after-school programs and emergency housing. He trusted the people there. Linda, the director he had spoken with the night before, greeted him at the front desk. She was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and gray streaks through her hair. The type of person who seemed born to help others. "You didn't waste any time," she said, smiling as he walked in. "I didn't want to," Keanu replied. "She's in a motel right now, but that's temporary. She's doing everything she can for her baby. I just want to make sure she has a real chance." Linda nodded, leading him into her small office. The walls were covered with photos, smiling families, kids, holding certificates, volunteers serving food. On her desk sat a stack of files labeled Emergency Intake. "We've got space in one of the family suites," she said. "It's not big, but it's private. She'll have her own bathroom, a crib, and access to our kitchen. We can set her up with a counselor to help her with paperwork and job placement." Keanu listened carefully, his expression thoughtful. "That's exactly what she needs. I'll cover the costs for as long as it takes. Not just for her, expand it for others too. I know there are more mothers like her." Linda blinked, stunned for a moment. "Keanu, that could keep the program running for months, maybe longer. Are you sure?" He nodded, his tone calm and resolute. "Completely. Just make it happen. No press, no attention. I just want results." Linda smiled warmly. "You have no idea how many people this will help." Keanu leaned back in the chair, exhaling slowly. "I'm not trying to help everyone," he said quietly. "Just one person at a time." After finalizing the arrangements, Keanu stepped outside the community center and stood by his car for a moment, letting the soft hum of morning traffic fill the air. The world around him seemed to move at its usual pace. People rushing to work, children laughing on their way to school, the smell of coffee wafting from a nearby cafe. But his mind was elsewhere, focused entirely on one woman and her child who, for the first time in months, were sleeping under a real roof. He pulled out his phone again and made another call, this time to an old friend who ran a local outreach program for women and families in crisis. Her name was Monica, a former social worker turned nonprofit advocate. She picked up on the second ring. "Keanu? It's been forever," she said with a laugh. "What's going on?" He smiled faintly, his tone steady but urgent. "Hey, Monica, I need your help with something important. There's a woman, Emily, and her baby, Oliver. She's been living in her car. I got her into a motel last night, but she needs something long-term. I've already set up a spot for her at Hope Haven, but I want to make sure she has more than just shelter. She needs someone who can guide her, get her the right resources." Monica's voice softened immediately. "You're still doing this quietly, aren't you?" "Always," he said. She chuckled. "That's what I love about you. I'll send over one of our case coordinators today. She can meet Emily at the community center, walk her through social services, and see if we can get her a childcare voucher. That'll make finding work a lot easier." "Thank you," Keanu replied sincerely. "I owe you." "No, you don't. You're one of the few people who still believes one person can make a difference," Monica said. As they hung up, Keanu leaned against his car, watching a line of people entering the center. Mothers, fathers, children, all searching for stability. It reminded him why he had always chosen to live quietly, despite his fame. True help never came from cameras or headlines. It came from presence, from showing up. He stayed for a while, speaking briefly with Linda and a few volunteers, learning more about their programs. Then, he wrote a check large enough to expand their services for the next 6 months. When he handed it to Linda, she froze. "This could change everything," she whispered. "We could open another wing, bring in more staff. There are so many families waiting." Keanu shook his head modestly. "Don't thank me. Just use it well. Make sure no mother has to sleep in a car again." As he walked toward the exit, Linda's voice followed him softly. You really are one of a kind, Keanu. He smiled, but didn't look back. I'm just doing what anyone should. Outside, the sky had turned clear, the kind of blue that promised a better day ahead. Keanu stood beside his car for a long moment, letting the sun warm his face. Then he took out his phone once more and opened his notes app. He typed a single sentence: build something lasting. That idea had been forming in the back of his mind since he first met Emily. Now it had taken shape. Maybe this wasn't just about one mother and her baby. Maybe it was about all the people who fell through the cracks of a system too slow to catch them. That night, back at home, he sat at his desk again with a fresh notebook. He wrote down everything he had learned over the past week about the lack of affordable housing, the barriers for single parents, the fear of losing custody. Each note turned into an idea. Each idea into a step. He wanted to create something that didn't just react to crisis, but prevented it. A program that could help struggling parents rebuild before they reached the point of sleeping in cars. When he finally closed the notebook, the city outside his window was quiet again. Somewhere across town, Emily and Oliver were safe, wrapped in warmth and sleep. Keanu leaned back in his chair and whispered to himself, "Tonight, she rests. Tomorrow, we rebuild." The next morning came soft and golden, with sunlight filtering through the thin curtains of the motel room. Emily stirred awake to the sound of birds outside. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. The bed beneath her was soft, Oliver's breathing beside her was steady, and there was warmth, real warmth spreading through the room. It felt like a dream she was afraid to break. She looked down at Oliver, still fast asleep with one small hand resting on her arm. His face was calm, untroubled. It had been months since she'd seen him sleep like that. Her chest tightened as tears formed in her eyes. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt safe enough to cry. A soft knock at the door startled her. She wiped her eyes quickly and opened it just enough to peek out. Keanu stood there, holding several shopping bags in his arms, a faint smile on his face. "Good morning," he said gently. "I hope I didn't wake you." Emily blinked, confused. "You didn't have to come back." "I said I would," he replied simply, stepping inside when she opened the door wider. He set the bags down on the small table by the bed. "I brought you a few things. Clothes for both of you, hygiene kits, and maybe a little surprise for Oliver." Her eyes darted toward the bags, disbelief clouding her face. "Keanu, this is too much. You've already done more than anyone ever has. Why are you doing all this?" He met her gaze steadily. "Because everyone deserves a restart," he said softly. "You and Oliver too." Her lips trembled, her voice small. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to," he said. "Just keep going. That's thanks enough." Emily reached for one of the bags and slowly pulled out a soft blue onesie, folded neatly inside. Her hand lingered on the fabric. "He hasn't had anything new since before Liam died," she murmured. Keanu's eyes softened. "Then it's about time he did." He knelt beside the table and pulled out a small plush giraffe from another bag. When Emily saw it, a faint laugh escaped her lips, the first genuine sound of joy he had heard from her. "He's going to love that," she said, her tone breaking somewhere between gratitude and disbelief. Keanu stood and looked around the room, noticing how she had carefully arranged the blanket on the bed, how she'd placed her shoes neatly by the door. Even in survival, she carried dignity. He admired that deeply. "Emily," he said after a pause, "I have somewhere to take you today. Somewhere safe. Somewhere you and Oliver can stay for as long as you need." Her eyes widened slightly. "Another motel?" He shook his head. "No, a real place, with people who will help you start fresh." Emily stared at him, her brow furrowing. "A real place?" she asked, softly. "What do you mean?" Keanu nodded with quiet reassurance. "It's called Hope Haven. It's a community center I've worked with before. They help families get back on their feet. Temporary housing, job assistance, even childcare when you're ready to work again. They know you're coming. It's already arranged." Her mouth opened slightly, as if to protest, but the words wouldn't come. She looked down at Oliver, who had woken and was now clutching his blanket, babbling softly. The sight of her son's small face seemed to pull something from deep inside her, a longing for normalcy, for stability, for a life that wasn't dictated by fear and scarcity. I don't know what to say, she whispered. Then don't, Keanu said gently. Just let someone help you this time. Emily pressed a hand to her mouth, emotion flooding her. You've done more for us in a few days than anyone ever has, she murmured. I feel like if I blink, all of this will disappear. He smiled faintly. It won't. This isn't a dream. It's a new start. The drive to Hope Haven was quiet. Emily followed behind in her old sedan, every turn of the wheel carrying her farther away from the life she had barely been surviving. She watched Keanu's car in front of her, steady and sure, guiding her like a beacon. Oliver cooed softly from his car seat, and for the first time in months, her heart didn't feel entirely heavy. When they arrived, Emily parked beside Keanu in the small gravel lot. The community center stood before them, a 2-story brick building with white trim and flower beds framing the entrance. A large mural covered one wall, painted with bright colors that depicted families, children, and hands lifting toward the sky. Keanu opened her door and offered a small, encouraging smile. Welcome home, he said. Emily looked around, her eyes wide. This place, it's beautiful. Inside, the air was filled with the faint scent of freshly baked bread and disinfectant. Volunteers moved quietly through the halls, some carrying clipboards, others guiding children toward a play area. A woman approached them, a kind face framed by silver hair and warm brown eyes. Emily, this is Linda, Keanu said. She's the director here. Linda extended her hand. We're so glad you're here, she said sincerely. We've prepared a room for you and Oliver. Let's show you around. Emily followed her down a narrow hallway lined with family photos from past residents, smiling mothers holding their children, graduates holding diplomas, and handwritten notes of gratitude pinned to corkboards. Each photo whispered the same message. People had rebuilt their lives here. When they reached the small room at the end of the hall, Emily froze in the doorway. It wasn't grand, but it was perfect. A twin bed, a dresser, a window that let in warm sunlight, and a white crib placed gently against the wall. Her breath caught in her throat. She stepped inside slowly, running her hand across the soft blanket folded over the crib rail. Oliver let out a happy sound from her arms, as if he understood what this meant. Linda smiled gently. You'll have meals provided, access to laundry, and full privacy here. Take your time settling in. You're safe now. Those words broke her. Tears spilled freely as she clutched Oliver to her chest and whispered, We're safe now, baby. We're really safe. Keanu watched from the doorway, his heart tightening. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The way Emily held her son said everything. He nodded quietly to Linda, who gave him a knowing look of gratitude. As he walked out of the building into the soft afternoon light, he glanced back, once, through the window. He could see Emily rocking Oliver by the crib, sunlight surrounding them both like a quiet promise. His heart was heavy, but filled with hope. The following days unfolded like a slow sunrise for Emily. For the first time in months, she woke up without the weight of fear pressing against her chest. Each morning at Hope Haven began with the smell of warm breakfast, drifting through the hallways, eggs, toast, sometimes pancakes if one of the volunteers felt generous. The sound of children laughing filled the air, echoing through the common area. Emily sat with Oliver each morning at a small table near the window. She fed him oatmeal and smiled as he giggled when the spoon touched his lips. His cheeks looked fuller now, his eyes brighter. The color had returned to both of them. The staff at Hope Haven worked gently, never pushing, always encouraging. Linda introduced Emily to a counselor named Dana, a soft-spoken woman who met with her twice a week. Their sessions were quiet but healing. For the first time, Emily allowed herself to talk about the accident, about the nights she'd spent crying in silence, about the guilt that had lingered far too long. It's okay to start over, Dana told her one afternoon. Starting over doesn't erase what came before, it honors it. Those words stuck with her. Each day, Emily began to rebuild. piece by fragile piece. She helped in the kitchen when she could, folding towels or setting tables for other families. The act of being useful again brought her a strange but welcome comfort. Keanu visited every few days, never staying long, never drawing attention. He'd arrive quietly with coffee for Linda, or drop off new toys for the children, blending in with the rhythm of the center. When Emily saw him, she always smiled shyly, still unsure how to express the depth of her gratitude. One morning, as they walked through the garden behind the center, she said softly, "I've been thinking a lot about what comes next." Keanu looked at her, his expression calm but attentive. "That's a good thing to think about," he said. "What do you want to do?" "I want to work," she replied, her voice steady but tentative. "Not just for the money, but because I need to feel like I can stand on my own 2 feet again. I used to be a receptionist before everything happened. I was good at it. I liked meeting people." Keanu nodded thoughtfully. "You're ready," he said, "and I think I might know someone who can help." Her brows lifted slightly. "Really?" He smiled faintly. "Yeah. A friend of mine runs a small office downtown. He's always saying he needs reliable people with heart more than experience. I'll give him a call." Emily's eyes widened. "Keanu, I don't want to take advantage of your connections." "You're not," he interrupted gently. "You're earning your future, one step at a time. This is just me opening a door. What you do after that is all you." She hesitated, then nodded slowly. "All right, I'll try." And for the first time, she said those words without fear. 2 days later, Emily stood in front of a small brick building downtown, clutching a worn leather purse and trying to calm the flutter in her chest. The sign above the door read, "Harper & Co. Consulting." It wasn't a big company, but it looked professional: glass doors, potted plants by the entrance, and a steady flow of people walking in and out with purpose. Keanu waited with her at the curb. He noticed her trembling hands and gave a small, encouraging smile. "You'll do great," he said softly. "Just be yourself." She exhaled shakily. "I haven't had an interview in over a year. I don't even know if I remember how to talk to people properly anymore." "You'll remember," he said. "You've been surviving on courage alone for months." "Talking will be easy after that." Emily laughed nervously, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. "You make it sound simple." "It's not," Keanu replied, "but it's worth it." Inside, the office was bright and welcoming. The receptionist, a cheerful woman named Zoe, led Emily to a small meeting room. Within minutes, a middle-aged man with kind eyes entered. His name was David Harper, Keanu's longtime friend and the owner of the firm. "So," David said warmly, "Keanu tells me you're reliable, organized, and don't back down easily. That's about all I need to hear, but let's talk a bit more." Emily blinked, unsure whether to laugh or cry. "He really said that?" "He did," David said with a grin. "And he doesn't say much about anyone unless he means it." They talked for nearly half an hour. Emily explained her experience from her old job, how she managed schedules, greeted clients, and handled paperwork. She spoke with quiet confidence, surprised at how easily the words came once she started. David listened closely, nodding with approval. When the conversation ended, he leaned back in his chair. "We can start you part-time," he said. "Flexible hours, so you can take care of your little one. We'll train you on the new software, but honestly, I think you'll fit right in." Emily froze, eyes wide. "Are you serious?" David smiled. "Absolutely. Welcome aboard." For a moment, she couldn't speak. Her throat tightened as tears filled her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "You have no idea what this means." Outside the building, Keanu waited near his car. When Emily stepped out, he immediately noticed the way her expression had changed. The nervousness was gone, replaced by something brighter. Hope. "Well?" he asked, smiling. She laughed through her tears. "I got the job." Keanu's face lit up. "I knew you would." She looked down for a moment, then met his eyes. "You gave me the chance," she said. "You believed in me when I didn't." He shook his head. "No, Emily. You did the hard part. You just needed someone to remind you what you were capable of." as she stood there holding the offer letter in her hand. The city lights flickering in her eyes, she realized she hadn't just gotten a job. She had found her footing again. It was her first real step toward freedom. Monday morning arrived crisp and clear, the kind of morning that carried the faint promise of something new. Emily stood in front of the small mirror inside her room at Hope Haven, carefully smoothing the wrinkles from her blouse. It was secondhand, a pale cream color with a tiny tear she had stitched herself the night before, but it felt like a uniform of courage. Her hair was tied neatly, and her shoes, though old, were polished. Oliver giggled from the crib, waving his tiny hands as if cheering her on. Emily smiled softly. "Wish me luck, sweetheart," she whispered, kissing his forehead before handing him to Linda, who had offered to watch him while she worked her first shift. When Emily stepped outside, Keanu was already waiting by his car, leaning against the hood with a cup of coffee in his hand. He looked up as she approached and smiled. "You look ready," he said. "I feel like my stomach disagrees," she replied nervously. He chuckled, opening the passenger door for her. "That's a good sign. Nerves mean it matters." The drive to Harper & Co. was quiet but peaceful. The morning sun filtered through the windshield, painting the road in gold. Emily glanced out the window, her heart racing faster with every passing block. "I still can't believe this is happening," she said quietly. "A week ago, I was sleeping in a parking lot. Now I'm on my way to a real job." Keanu's voice was calm but full of pride. "You earned this, Emily. Every bit of it." When they arrived, she took a deep breath before stepping out of the car. The building looked different now, less intimidating, more like a door she was finally ready to walk through. Keanu handed her a small paper bag. "Lunch," he said simply. "In case you forget to eat." She smiled, fighting back tears. "You think of everything." "Just trying to make sure you have one less thing to worry about," he replied with a grin. Inside, the office buzzed with quiet energy. Phones rang, printers hummed, and sunlight poured through the wide windows that overlooked the street below. The office manager, Zoe, greeted her warmly. "Welcome back, Emily. We're happy to have you." Zoe showed her around, introducing her to co-workers who smiled and offered friendly nods. Emily's heart raced with every introduction. She could feel her confidence building with each passing moment, though her hands still shook when she touched the keyboard at her desk. By mid-morning, the rhythm of the office began to pull her in. Answering calls, taking notes, organizing files, it felt familiar, almost comforting. She stumbled a few times, made a small mistake on a form, but Zoe was patient, guiding her kindly. "You'll get the hang of it," Zoe said, smiling. "You've got good instincts, I can tell." Emily nodded gratefully. "Thank you. I just want to do my best." And she meant it. By lunchtime, Emily's nerves had turned into something lighter fatigue, mixed with a quiet pride. Her desk wasn't as intimidating now, and her coworkers had started to treat her as part of the team. A young woman named Claire invited her to join the others in the break room, but Emily politely declined, wanting a few minutes alone to breathe. She carried her lunch bag to the window near her desk, overlooking the street below. The city moved like a slow heartbeat, cars passing, people hurrying, sunlight glinting off shop windows. She unwrapped the sandwich Keanu had packed for her, smiling at how neatly it was folded, with a small napkin tucked inside. It reminded her of something she hadn't felt in years, being cared for. Then she noticed something that made her stop. Across the street, parked under the shade of a tree, sat a black car she recognized instantly. Keanu's car. He wasn't inside the stop, building, wasn't waiting for attention or thanks. He was just there, parked quietly, his hand resting on the steering wheel, watching the entrance as if making sure everything was okay. Emily's throat tightened. The sight of him sitting there so calmly filled her with emotion she couldn't explain. Gratitude, disbelief, warmth, it all blended together until her eyes blurred with tears. She pressed her palm against the window, whispering to herself. He stayed. She didn't wave or call out. She just stood there for a few minutes, taking in the image of the man who had turned strangers into safety and despair into direction. When she looked again, the car was gone, but it didn't matter. She knew he'd seen her through this first day, quietly, faithfully, the way he always did. The rest of the afternoon passed in a steady rhythm. She learned the filing system, managed a few phone calls on her own, and even helped Claire with a delivery form. Each small success felt monumental. By the end of the day, when she turned off her monitor and gathered her bag, she realized she hadn't felt this capable in a very long time. Back at Hope Haven that evening, Emily picked up Oliver from Linda, who smiled as soon as she saw her. "How was it?" Emily's smile spread slowly, her voice trembling with joy. "It was hard and wonderful." Later that night, after tucking Oliver into his crib, she sat on the edge of her bed, staring at her phone. The room was quiet, except for the soft hum of the heater. Finally, she dialed Keanu's number. He picked up almost immediately. "Hey, Emily, how did it go?" She took a deep breath, tears returning. "I don't feel invisible anymore," she said softly. There was a pause on the other end, followed by his quiet, steady voice. "You never were." She smiled through her tears. "Thank you, Keanu, for everything." "Don't thank me," he said gently. "Just keep shining. The world needs people like you to remind it what resilience looks like." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Emily whispered, "Good night." "Good night, Emily," Keanu replied. "You did great today." As she ended the call, she looked at Oliver sleeping peacefully, his little chest rising and falling. The weight of survival had been replaced with something else, hope. Weeks passed, and Emily's life began to settle into a rhythm that felt almost ordinary. She woke early each morning, dressed for work, kissed Oliver goodbye, and walked out the door with a quiet confidence that had once seemed impossible. The dark circles beneath her eyes were fading, replaced by a glow of purpose. Hope Haven had become more than a shelter, it was home. But one afternoon, as she sat at her small desk in the office, her phone buzzed with a message that made her heart drop. It was from an unfamiliar number, but the name attached was one she recognized immediately. Margaret Lawson, her late husband's mother. The message was simple. "Emily, we've been trying to find you. We saw a post online from the community center. We'd like to see Oliver." Her breath caught. She hadn't expected this. Not now. Not when things were finally calm. She reread the words over and over, her fingers trembling. For a long moment, she just sat there, frozen. Her memories of the last time she had seen them flashed through her mind, the tense arguments, the accusations, the way they'd called her unfit and selfish for leaving. When her shift ended, she stepped outside and called Keanu. Her voice shook as she spoke. "They found me," she said quietly. "Liam's parents. They want to see Oliver." There was silence on the other end for a moment before Keanu asked gently, "How do you feel about that?" "I don't know," she whispered. "Part of me wants to run. Another part wants to show them I'm not the broken person they think I am." "Then maybe that's exactly what you should do," he said softly. "Face them from strength, not fear. You don't owe them anger anymore." Emily sighed, closing her eyes. "What if they try to take him again?" "They won't," Keanu said firmly. "You're not the same woman you were then. You're standing on your own now, and they'll see that." His words calmed her in ways she didn't expect. That night, she lay awake staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything she'd endured, the long nights in the car, the tears she'd hidden from Oliver, the kindness that had pulled her out of the dark. She realized she wasn't running anymore. She was rebuilding, and maybe facing them was part of that process. The next day, she called Margaret back. Her voice was steady as she said, "Yes, you can visit, but please, let's meet somewhere neutral." Margaret agreed immediately, her tone cautious but hopeful. They arranged to meet that weekend at the park near Hope Haven. When Emily hung up, she exhaled shakily and whispered to herself, "It's time." Saturday arrived bright and cool, the kind of day that carried a gentle calm in the air. Emily dressed Oliver in his little blue jacket and tiny sneakers, her hands shaking slightly as she zipped him up. Her heart thudded in her chest, but she took a deep breath and whispered to herself, "Strength, not fear." At the park, she chose a bench under a sycamore tree. close enough to the playground but quiet enough to talk. When she looked up, she saw them, Margaret and Henry Lawson, walking slowly toward her. Their faces looked older than she remembered, worn by grief and time. Margaret clutched her purse tightly, and Henry's eyes searched the ground as if unsure how to begin. Emily stood, holding Oliver in her arms. For a few seconds, no one spoke. The silence carried the weight of everything that had gone wrong between them. Then Margaret's voice broke softly. "You look well, Emily." Emily nodded. "Thank you. It's been a long road." Her mother-in-law's gaze drifted to Oliver. "He's grown so much. He looks just like Liam." Her lips trembled, and her eyes glistened. "May I?" Emily hesitated for a moment, then stepped forward and gently handed Oliver to her. The older woman held him carefully, her hands trembling as she looked into his small, curious face. Henry leaned in close, smiling faintly. "Hello, little man," he murmured. Watching them, Emily felt a strange mix of emotions. Fear still lingered at the edges, but beneath it was something else: understanding. These were people who had lost their son, just as she had lost her husband. Their pain had made them lash out, but now, standing here, they just looked tired, human. Margaret looked up at her, her voice breaking. "Emily, we were wrong. We were grieving and scared. We thought you couldn't handle it. But seeing you now, seeing how strong you've become, we owe you an apology." Henry nodded slowly. "We didn't see what you were going through. We only saw our loss. I'm sorry for how we treated you." Emily felt her throat tighten. For months, she had imagined this moment, thinking she would have nothing but anger to give them. But instead, she felt something gentler rising within her. She looked at them, at their tear-streaked faces, and realized forgiveness was not about forgetting, it was about freeing herself from the past. "I was angry for a long time," she admitted quietly. "I felt like you blamed me for everything that went wrong. But I've learned that holding on to pain just keeps you trapped. I forgive you. And I hope you can forgive me too, for leaving the way I did." Margaret's shoulders shook as she nodded. "We already have." For the first time, Emily smiled, a real, peaceful smile. She watched as Oliver reached out and grabbed a strand of Margaret's hair, giggling. It was such an innocent sound, pure and free of the pain that had bound the adults for so long. They spent an hour together, walking through the park, sharing small stories about Liam, his laugh, his stubbornness, the way he used to sing in the shower. For the first time, their memories didn't bring sorrow, but warmth. When the visit ended, Margaret hugged Emily tightly. "You've done so well," she whispered. Liam would be proud. As Emily watched them walk away, the sun low behind them, she felt a deep stillness inside. She knew something had closed a wound that had been open too long. That evening, she called Keanu. "How did it go?" he asked. Emily's voice was soft but certain. "It was hard, but it was good. They apologized, and I forgave them. I didn't think I could, but I did." There was quiet pride in Keanu's voice as he said, "That's strength, Emily." She paused, her voice trembling. "You helped me rebuild more than my life. You helped me rebuild faith." Keanu smiled, though she couldn't see it. "You did that yourself. I just reminded you it was still there." As the line fell silent, Emily looked over at Oliver, sleeping peacefully. The night outside was calm, and for the first time in a long while, so was her heart. The weeks that followed brought quiet transformation. The days no longer blurred together in struggle. They had rhythm now, shaped by purpose and small victories. Emily had settled into her new job at Harper & Co., earning not just income, but confidence. Each morning she woke early, packed a small bag for Oliver, and smiled at her reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back was no longer afraid. At Hope Haven, life had taken on a gentle warmth. Laughter echoed in the halls, and familiar faces greeted her with kindness. Linda often stopped by her room to chat, reminding her that she didn't have to rush her next steps. But Emily's heart had already found its direction. She wanted to give back. So one afternoon, after finishing work early, She walked into the community center and asked to volunteer. Linda looked up from her desk, pleasantly surprised. "Are you sure, Emily? You've already been through so much. You should rest when you can." Emily smiled softly. "Resting doesn't heal me. Helping others does." Linda's expression melted into pride. "Then welcome to the team." From that day forward, Emily began volunteering 3 days a week. Her tasks were simple: sorting clothes, handing out care packages, organizing supplies, but each act carried a quiet meaning. She worked beside other mothers who had lost jobs, homes, and hope, and she saw her past reflected in their eyes. One woman, young and pale with exhaustion, came in carrying a newborn wrapped in a thin blanket. Her story was painfully familiar: evicted, alone, frightened of losing her child. As Emily handed her a set of clothes and a small pack of diapers, she spoke softly. "I know what you're going through. A few months ago, that was me." The woman looked at her, startled. "You?" Emily nodded, smiling gently. "I lived in my car with my son. I thought it would never get better, but it did. People helped me, and now I get to help you." The woman's eyes filled with tears. She whispered, "Thank you." Emily squeezed her hand. "You'll be okay, one day at a time." Word spread through the center about Emily's story, but she never made it about herself. She spoke only when it helped others find courage. The same benches where she had once sat in fear were now places of hope. Sometimes, as she folded donated baby clothes or prepared warm meals, she thought of Keanu. She hadn't seen him in a few weeks, but she felt his presence in every kindness she gave away. He had taught her something deeper than charity. He had shown her the power of showing up for someone, even quietly, even once. One afternoon, as she worked near the entrance, sorting through boxes of donated clothes, she heard a familiar voice behind her. "Looks like you're running the place now." She turned and froze, smiling instantly. Keanu stood by the doorway, a calm smile on his face, hands in his jacket pockets. Emily's heart lifted the moment she saw him. She wiped her hands on her apron and walked toward him, a mix of surprise and pure joy softening her features. "You came back?" she said warmly. "I told you I'd be around." Keanu replied with a quiet smile. "I wanted to see how you and Oliver were doing." She motioned for him to follow her through the bustling hallway, where volunteers sorted boxes and families picked out clothes. "We're doing well," she said, her tone filled with calm certainty. "Better than I thought we ever could. I started helping out here. It felt right." Keanu glanced around at the center, at the same walls where he had first walked in weeks ago to make arrangements for her, and now saw Emily moving through it like she belonged. She stopped to help a child try on a coat, smiled at a mother struggling with a stroller, and gave quiet reassurance to a volunteer sorting donations. She had become part of the heartbeat of the place. He could see it clearly. This wasn't just recovery, it was rebirth. When the rush slowed, Emily led him to a quiet corner near the small play area. Children's laughter echoed softly from the other room. She turned to him, emotion in her eyes. "You probably don't even realize what you did for me," she said. "You didn't just help me survive, you helped me find purpose again." Keanu looked down for a moment, his voice gentle. "You give me too much credit. You were already strong, Emily. You just needed someone to remind you." She shook her head, smiling through tears. "No. You showed me what compassion looks like. You didn't have to stop that night in the parking lot, but you did. You didn't have to come back, or make calls, or drive me to work. You chose to. You saved me." He met her gaze, his tone soft but firm. "No, Emily. You saved yourself. I just showed up." She took a step closer and hugged him tightly. It wasn't the kind of embrace born from desperation. It was one of gratitude, strength, and quiet peace. Keanu hesitated for only a second before returning the hug, his expression filled with quiet pride. When they pulled apart, she smiled through misty eyes. "You know, I tell people about what happened, but not about you. I tell them that sometimes a stranger's kindness can change everything. I think that's enough. He nodded approvingly. That's exactly the point. Kindness doesn't need a name. They stood there for a moment, watching the light stream in through the wide windows. Children's laughter mingled with the rustle of donated clothes, and the faint smell of fresh coffee filled the air. Everything felt alive. As Keanu turned to leave, Emily called after him. "You'll come back again, right?" He smiled over his shoulder. "Count on it." Emily watched him walk out into the afternoon sun, his figure fading into the glow. Around her, life continued busy, noisy, and beautiful. She looked down at her hands, at the simple work she was doing, and realized she wasn't just helping others. She was closing a circle that had begun the night a stranger stopped to care. And this time, she wasn't just surviving, she was shining. 2 weeks later, Hope Haven buzzed with an unusual energy. Volunteers moved faster than usual, staff whispered in the hallways, and Linda seemed both nervous and excited. Emily noticed the shift immediately when she arrived that morning. She was organizing clothes when Linda approached with a warm but cautious smile. "Emily, there's someone I'd like you to meet," Linda said. "She's a reporter from Channel 7. Her name's Rachel Kim. She's been covering community outreach stories, and someone told her about what you've been doing here." Emily froze mid-motion, the folded sweater still in her hands. "A reporter? Why would she want to talk to me?" Linda smiled knowingly. "Because your story is changing people, Emily. You've come full circle from needing help to giving it. That's powerful. She wants to highlight that." Emily shook her head slowly. "I don't know. I'm not good with cameras. I don't want people looking at me like I'm some charity case." "She's not here for pity," Linda said softly. "She's here for hope." Emily hesitated. "Did Keanu know about this?" "Actually, he suggested it," Linda said gently. "He thought your story might help others who feel hopeless right now." The mention of his name made her chest tighten. If Keanu believed it could help others, maybe it was worth it. She nodded slowly. "All right," she said quietly. "I'll do it, but only if it stays focused on the center, not on me." That afternoon, Rachel arrived with a cameraman. She was young, polished, but kind in her demeanor. "Emily," she said warmly, shaking her hand. "Thank you for agreeing to talk with me. I promise this isn't about sensationalism, it's about truth. You're proof that small kindness can create big change." They filmed inside the center. Emily sat in one of the chairs near the play area, sunlight streaming through the windows. Her voice trembled at first, but as the interview went on, she spoke with quiet conviction. "I was at my lowest point," she said. "I thought I was invisible, but one night, someone noticed me. Not because of fame or obligation, just because they cared. That moment changed everything. And now, I get to pass that kindness forward." Rachel leaned forward. "And that person was Keanu Reeves?" Emily smiled softly. "Yes, but he never wanted credit. He said he just showed up. I think that's what kindness really is, showing up when someone needs you, without expecting anything in return." By the end of the interview, the entire crew was silent. The story wasn't flashy or dramatic, it was real. It carried warmth and humility in every word Emily spoke. That evening, as Rachel packed up, she said sincerely, "Emily, this story is going to touch hearts. Thank you for trusting us." The news segment aired 3 days later during the evening broadcast. It began with quiet footage of Hope Haven's bustling halls, volunteers sorting donations, and mothers laughing with their children. Then came Emily's voice, steady yet emotional, as she recounted her journey from a cold parking lot to rebuilding her life. Her words echoed through living rooms across the city. "I thought the world had stopped caring," she said softly in the interview. "But sometimes, all it takes is one person to remind you that it hasn't." When Rachel mentioned Keanu's role, the camera cut briefly to an old photo from the center. Keanu standing in the background during a donation drive, unnoticed, hands in his pockets. The reporter narrated, "The man who helped Emily declined to appear on camera. When asked for comment, he said only, 'It wasn't me, it was humanity.'" That single line resonated more deeply than anyone expected. By morning, the segment had gone viral. It spread first through local networks, then across social media. Hashtags like #ShowUpForSomeone and #HopeHavenStory trended nationwide. Within 48 hours, thousands of viewers had shared the clip, writing messages about how it reminded them to help others. Donations began pouring into the community center, boxes of supplies, checks in the mail, even handwritten letters from people who said Emily's courage had rekindled their faith in goodness. At Hope Haven, the phones didn't stop ringing. Linda and her staff worked tirelessly to process donations and schedule volunteers. "This is unbelievable," she told Emily one morning, her voice filled with awe. "We just received enough funding to open a second location downtown. All because of your story." Emily smiled, still overwhelmed by the response. "It wasn't me, Linda. It was all of us." Later that afternoon, as she organized new donations in the storage room, she heard quiet applause behind her. She turned to find Keanu, standing by the doorway, watching her with a proud, almost fatherly smile. "Looks like you started a movement," he said gently. Emily laughed, shaking her head. "You mean we did?" He stepped closer, his tone thoughtful. "You know, when I first saw you that night, I didn't know what to do. I just knew I couldn't drive away. But watching this now, seeing how many lives your story has touched, I realize maybe that's what kindness is supposed to do. It's supposed to ripple." Emily looked down, her voice quiet but full of emotion. "I used to think my life had ended the day Liam died, but you showed me it was just beginning in a different way. You helped me rebuild faith not just in others, but in myself." Keanu nodded. "That's what this world needs. More people who found hope the hard way. They're the ones who keep it alive for everyone else." Outside, the sound of laughter drifted in from the courtyard where children played. The center buzzed with renewed energy. People came and went, carrying food, blankets, and supplies. Hope Haven had become more than a shelter. It was a symbol of what could happen when compassion became contagious. A few hours later, Rachel returned to film a short follow-up piece about the overwhelming response. When she asked Keanu if he would appear on camera this time, he politely declined again. "I don't need the attention," he said with a small smile. "Just make sure the people who need help know where to find it." But even without him speaking directly, his message was everywhere. Across the country, volunteers organized local drives under the name Project Hope Haven. Small towns gathered donations. Schools taught students about empathy using Emily's story as an example. And countless strangers wrote online, sharing how the simple phrase, "It wasn't me, it was humanity," had changed the way they saw the world. Back at the community center, Emily finished her shift and stepped outside into the golden evening light. The air was cool, and the sky glowed orange over the rooftops. She spotted Keanu leaning against his car near the curb, watching the sunset. "Looks like the whole world's talking about us," she said, smiling. He chuckled softly. "Good. Maybe that means they're ready to care again." For a while, they stood together in comfortable silence, watching the last light fade. The moment felt peaceful, almost sacred, a reminder that sometimes the quietest acts created the loudest echoes. Emily looked at him, her voice filled with gratitude. "You were right, Keanu. One person really can make a difference." He glanced at her with that familiar, gentle smile. "Maybe, but what really changes the world," he said, "is when that one person becomes two." As the sun disappeared behind the horizon, both of them knew that something bigger than a story had begun. It was a movement born from compassion, a ripple of humanity that would never quite fade. The success of the story brought more than headlines. It brought purpose. As weeks passed, Keanu began to see that what happened with Emily wasn't a coincidence. It was a calling. The movement that began with one act of compassion had grown into something larger, something that needed direction and permanence. He spent long evenings at his kitchen table, papers spread out, phone calls coming and going. Community directors, legal advisors, and charity organizers offered suggestions, but one idea stood out: a foundation dedicated to helping single mothers and homeless families rebuild with dignity. The name came easily. One evening, as he reviewed notes from Hope Haven, he looked at a photo of Emily holding her baby in the shelter garden. Beneath it, A child's name was written in small handwriting. Oliver. He smiled. The Oliver Foundation, he whispered. It felt right, innocent, hopeful, pure. Within a month, the foundation took form. Keanu funded it quietly, refusing any press coverage. He wanted the focus to remain on the people it would serve, not on himself. The foundation partnered with shelters, counseling centers, and housing programs across California. Its mission statement was simple: to restore dignity through compassion, opportunity, and community. Emily was among the first to know. Keanu visited her one morning at Hope Haven, where she was helping a young mother fill out job applications. When she saw him, she stood, smiling. "You're early today," she said playfully. "I came with news," he said, handing her a small folder. "I want you to see something." She opened it slowly. Inside were documents, photos, and a printed mission statement bearing the title, The Oliver Foundation. Her breath caught as she read the first line. Inspired by one mother's courage and one child's light. Her eyes filled instantly. "Keanu, you named it after Oliver?" He nodded, his voice soft. "He represents hope, Emily. The future. This isn't just for you, it's for every mother who thinks the world's forgotten her." She wiped a tear, speechless. "You really did this?" He smiled. "We did this." That afternoon, they drove to the new building together, a converted warehouse painted white and gold, filled with sunlight streaming through large windows. Inside, staff prepared desks and supplies, while volunteers arranged furniture in rooms designed for comfort, not pity. There were play areas for children, private counseling spaces, and classrooms for job training. Emily walked through each corridor in silence, her hand brushing against the smooth walls. The room smelled faintly of new paint and promise. "This place feels like a second chance," she said softly. "That's exactly what it's meant to be," Keanu replied. "And I want you to be part of it." She turned to him, confused. "Part of it? How?" He smiled gently. "You've lived it, Emily. You understand the struggle better than anyone. I'd like you to come on board as a counselor to guide other mothers through the same darkness you walked through." Her lips parted in disbelief. "Me? But I'm not trained." "I'm not, you're experienced," he interrupted kindly. "That's worth more than any certificate." Tears welled again, but this time they came with laughter. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," he said simply. Emily said yes. Her voice trembled as she did, but her heart was certain. Over the next few weeks, she shadowed counselors, learned the ropes, and found her rhythm in helping others. Every story she heard, every tear, every tremor of fear, every flicker of hope, brought her back to her own nights sleeping in that cold car. But now, instead of being consumed by those memories, she used them as light. The Oliver Foundation opened quietly, but powerfully. Word spread fast among shelters and outreach programs. Mothers came with toddlers, fathers who'd lost jobs came seeking guidance, and entire families who had been forgotten by the system walked through its doors to find something. Unexpected dignity. Emily became the heart of it. She greeted each newcomer personally, sitting with them over coffee, asking about their lives, their dreams, and their fears. She never spoke down to anyone, never used the word charity. Instead, she used phrases like, "Let's build forward," or "You've already survived the hardest part." Keanu visited often, but always quietly, staying in the background. He preferred to observe the life unfolding in the place he'd helped create. He would stand near the window, watching children laugh in the playroom, listening to soft piano music drifting through the halls. He saw hope moving like sunlight through people's lives. One afternoon, he found Emily in her small office, surrounded by notes and forms. She was tired, but glowing, her hair tied back, sleeves rolled up. She looked up as he entered. "You've built something beautiful," he said. She smiled. "No, we did. You planted the seed, Keanu. We just kept watering it." He chuckled quietly. "That's how good things grow." She leaned back in her chair, thoughtful. "You know, I used to wonder why bad things happen to good people, why I had to lose so much before finding peace. But now, I think maybe the pain wasn't meant to destroy me, it was meant to prepare me, to help me understand others. He nodded, his voice low. That's the secret, Emily. Pain can either close you off from the world or open you to it. You chose the second. Outside the window, the Foundation's courtyard was full of life volunteers, unloading donations, children playing tag, mothers talking softly. A mural was being painted along the side wall. A large tree with branches stretching wide, its roots wrapped around the words, "You are not alone." As Emily watched it take shape, she felt a quiet pride swelling inside her. Not the kind born from success, but from healing. She thought of the nights when she'd hidden Oliver beneath blankets, afraid the world would never see them again. Now, the world was learning from their story. Later that evening, they held the Foundation's first small ceremony. Staff, volunteers, and families gathered in the courtyard under string lights. The air was filled with laughter, music, and a sense of unity that couldn't be described, only felt. Linda took the stage first, her voice strong with emotion. This place exists because one person saw another, not as a problem, but as a person. That's how change begins. Then, she turned to Keanu and Emily. And because of both of you, hundreds more will now have that same chance. The crowd applauded warmly, some wiping tears from their eyes. When it was Emily's turn to speak, she stepped forward nervously, holding the microphone with shaking hands. "I was once where many of you are now," she said softly. "I know what it feels like to lose everything. But I also know what it feels like to be found by kindness, by grace, by people who refuse to give up on others. This foundation isn't about me or even Keanu. It's about all of us proving that humanity is still alive." Her voice broke for a moment, but she smiled through it. "Oliver may be too young to understand this now, but one day, I'll tell him that he was the reason his mom kept going, and that his name stands for hope." When she finished, the crowd rose in applause. Keanu, standing in the back, clapped quietly, his eyes glistening. That night, as the lights dimmed and families began to leave, Emily caught his gaze. He gave her a small nod, the kind that said everything words couldn't. The Oliver Foundation was more than a building now. It was living proof that one act of compassion could ignite a chain of miracles. The morning sun rose over Los Angeles, spilling golden light across the courtyard of the Oliver Foundation. Banners fluttered in the breeze, reading 1 year of hope. Volunteers set up long tables of food, while children ran laughing between them, their joy echoing off the newly painted walls. Keanu parked his motorcycle across the street and took a long look at the building. It had grown since the last time he'd been there, brighter, livelier, full of color. The murals that once stopped halfway up the wall now reached the roofline, each brushstroke painted by a mother or child who had found shelter within those walls. It no longer felt like a project. It felt like a living, breathing symbol of compassion. He walked through the gates quietly, unnoticed at first. He preferred it that way. The air was filled with laughter, music, and the faint scent of fresh bread from the kitchen. Everywhere he looked, he saw faces full of life. Mothers serving food, fathers helping set up chairs, volunteers handing out toys. It was everything he had hoped for and more. Emily spotted him from across the courtyard. Her expression lit up with surprise and joy. She waved him over, her voice bright above the noise. "You made it!" He smiled, slipping his sunglasses off. "Wouldn't miss it." She walked him through the courtyard, introducing him to new families. Some had found homes, others were still rebuilding, but all were smiling, surrounded by people who cared. Emily explained how the foundation had grown. 2 new shelters opened, partnerships formed with hospitals, counseling programs launched. "It's incredible, Emily," Keanu said, looking around. "You've built something that's changing lives." She shook her head, smiling humbly. "We built it. You gave me a chance. I just passed it on." They stopped near the play area, where a group of toddlers laughed and chased bubbles. Among them, a small boy with dark curls and bright brown eyes spotted Emily. He let out a squeal and ran toward her. "Oliver, now walking steadily on his tiny legs. Emily bent down, scooping him up as he giggled. "Look who's here," she said softly, turning him toward Keanu. Oliver's eyes widened as he recognized the man. Then, to everyone's surprise, he wriggled out of his mother's arms and toddled straight toward Keanu. The crowd quieted as the little boy wrapped his small arms around Keanu's leg, clinging tightly. Keanu froze for a moment, then knelt down slowly to meet the boy's gaze. Oliver looked up at him with pure innocence, his tiny hands gripping Keanu's knee. For a long second, the world seemed to fall silent. The laughter, the chatter, the music, everything paused in that small, perfect moment of connection. Emily's eyes shimmered as she watched. The man who had once saved them both was now kneeling in the middle of a thriving community that had grown from one night of compassion. Keanu smiled softly and placed a gentle hand on Oliver's shoulder. The little boy giggled and patted his cheek with clumsy affection, babbling a few incoherent words that made everyone nearby laugh. Keanu's eyes warmed as he whispered, "Hey there, little man. You've grown a lot since we first met." Emily stepped closer, her heart full. "He remembers you," she said quietly. "Every time he sees a motorcycle, he points and says, 'Keanu.'" Keanu laughed, his voice low and tender. "Then I guess I've got to ride carefully. He's watching me now." The crowd around them smiled at the sight. It wasn't the usual celebrity moment with flashing cameras or loud applause. It was something purer, a shared recognition of kindness made visible. Mothers who had once come to the Oliver Foundation seeking refuge now stood with confidence, their children thriving beside them. Volunteers and staff exchanged grateful glances. This was what hope looked like when it took root. Keanu rose to his feet, still holding Oliver's tiny hand. "You've got quite a community here," he said, turning to Emily. She nodded. "It's more than I ever dreamed of. When we started, I thought we'd just help a few families. But now, we have over 100 people supported each month. Some have even found permanent housing. And every time someone leaves, they promise to come back and volunteer." Keanu's voice softened. "That's the ripple, one life touching another." They walked together through the open house. Inside the main hall, photos lined the walls, families smiling, volunteers laughing, milestones celebrated. In one frame near the entrance was a picture from the first week. The Oliver Foundation opened. Emily holding Oliver in her arms, Keanu standing beside her. Above it, a small brass plaque read, "One act of kindness can light 1,000 more." Keanu paused to look at it, emotion flickering across his face. "I never thought a night in a parking lot would lead to this," he said quietly. Emily looked at him with gratitude. "That night saved us. But this place, it saves others every day. It's your legacy too, Keanu." He shook his head slowly. "No, it's humanity's. I just did what anyone should have done." Outside, the sound of children playing drew their attention again. Oliver was running in circles now, laughing as bubbles floated through the air. The other kids joined in, their joy unfiltered and contagious. Volunteers passed out food while musicians played soft guitar under the shade trees. The entire courtyard felt alive with peace. As they stood together watching, Emily said softly, "You know, sometimes I wonder how my life might have turned out if you hadn't stopped that night." Keanu turned toward her, his eyes calm. "You still would have made it. Maybe not the same way, maybe not as soon, but you had the strength in you all along. I just helped you see it." She smiled, her voice trembling slightly. "Maybe, but you reminded me the world still had good people in it. That meant everything." Keanu placed a hand over his heart, visibly moved. Then it was worth every moment. Emily nodded slowly, emotion filling her voice. "This," she gestured around them at the children, "the laughter, the sunlight spilling across the courtyard. This is what healing looks like." Keanu watched quietly as Oliver stumbled and fell into the grass, only to laugh and stand up again. "And that's what resilience looks like," he said softly. The applause began spontaneously, gentle but heartfelt. It wasn't for Keanu alone, nor for Emily, but for what they had created together, a living reminder that hope could grow from even the darkest nights. Keanu turned to her one last time and whispered, This is why it was all worth it." Emily smiled through tears. It always was. As the sun dipped low and music filled the air, the courtyard glowed with golden light, and the foundation's story, born from one act of compassion, continued to unfold, one miracle at a time. The Pacific stretched endlessly before him, its waves catching the late sunlight like molten glass. Keanu's motorcycle rumbled softly along the winding coast road, the breeze tugging at his jacket. He rode without hurry, lost in thought, the rhythm of the sea echoing in his chest. A year had passed since that first night in the cold parking lot, yet it still felt as vivid as yesterday, the fogged windows, the soft sound of a crying baby, and a young mother trying to hold her world together. He pulled over near a scenic overlook, cutting the engine. The silence that followed was peaceful, filled only by the sound of waves crashing below. Standing at the edge of the cliff, he looked out toward the horizon and whispered to himself, "Kindness doesn't need applause. It just needs courage." The words hung in the air, carried by the wind, as memories began to replay in his mind. The first hesitant conversation with Emily, the trembling acceptance of help, the joy in Oliver's laughter, the birth of the foundation, and the lives that had changed because one person chose to stop instead of drive away. He smiled faintly. The world had taken notice, but he never sought the spotlight. Fame had always been fleeting, but moments like these, quiet, genuine, transformative, were the ones that stayed. As the sun began to sink lower, the story of the Oliver Foundation unfolded in a silent montage in his thoughts. A young mother handing a new blanket to another woman, trembling with fear. Volunteers serving meals to families who had nothing. Children chasing bubbles through the courtyard where hope had once been scarce. Each image felt like a heartbeat, a rhythm of compassion spreading further with every act. For every life Emily touched, she reminded him of something he had long believed: that humanity, despite all its flaws, was still capable of grace. He saw it in the laughter of the children, in the strength of the mothers, in the gratitude of strangers. It wasn't about him. It was about people rediscovering what it meant to care. Keanu sat on a nearby bench overlooking the ocean, the horizon glowing orange and gold. He took a deep breath, feeling the salty air fill his lungs. "It was never about grand gestures," he murmured. "Just showing up when it matters." The roar of a car passing behind him faded into the distance, leaving only the waves. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the quiet remind him of everything good that still existed in the world. Somewhere far away, at the Oliver Foundation, Emily was finishing her day. She stood in the courtyard, the evening sun brushing her face, and watched the children playing under the mural that read, "You are not alone." The foundation lights flickered on, casting a golden glow across the courtyard. She smiled to herself, whispering, "Because one man cared, hundreds found light again." The same ocean wind carried her words westward, toward the coast where Keanu sat, unaware that she had just spoken the perfect ending to their shared story. As twilight deepened, Keanu remained at the overlook, the sound of the ocean now blending with the quiet hum of night. The world below shimmered with city lights, each one representing a home, a life, a story still unfolding. He thought about Emily and how far she had come from fear to strength, from isolation to community. She had turned her pain into purpose, proving that even the smallest act of compassion could ripple far beyond its moment. He started the motorcycle again, the headlights cutting through the dusk. The winding road along the California coast felt endless, yet peaceful. Each mile reminded him that there was still work to do, more lives to reach, more stories waiting to be rewritten by kindness. As he rode, his mind drifted through memories. The cold night air in that supermarket parking lot, the tiny hand of a baby reaching for warmth, and Emily's trembling voice whispering, Thank you for the first time." That night had changed her life, but in truth, it had changed his as well. He had witnessed something deeper than charity. It was faith in action, humanity rediscovering itself through empathy. The horizon opened before him, painted in deep shades of violet and blue. He smiled softly to himself. "The world doesn't need heroes," he whispered. "It just needs people who care." Back at the Oliver Foundation, the evening lights glowed through the windows. Inside, families gathered for dinner. Emily sat among them, laughing as Oliver reached for a spoon too big for his tiny hands. The sound of shared joy filled the room, blending with the clinking of dishes and the warmth of togetherness. Across one wall hung a framed quote that Keanu had written before the foundation opened. It read, "One moment of compassion can outlive a lifetime of silence." Below it were dozens of photos, families once broken, now whole again. Emily glanced at the words, then at her son. "Because one man cared," she said softly, "hundreds found light again." Outside, a breeze swept through the courtyard, carrying laughter into the night. The same breeze reached the open road, where Keanu rode along the cliffs, his face lit by the moonlight, his heart calm. He didn't need thanks or recognition. The quiet knowledge that hope had multiplied was enough. As he disappeared into the horizon, a final image lingered. Mothers embracing their children, volunteers offering warm meals, a child holding a donated toy for the first time. The world wasn't fixed, but it was healing one act of kindness at a time. The screen slowly faded to black. A single line appeared across the darkness, illuminated in white letters. "Kindness doesn't need applause. It just needs courage." A soft instrumental melody began to play as scenes of everyday compassion appeared. Strangers helping strangers, food drives, shelters filled with laughter, children sharing what little they had. Then Emily's voice returned, calm and full of warmth. "Because one man cared, hundreds found light again." The final words appeared. If you believe compassion still matters, share this incredible story. And subscribe for more true stories of hope.